And welcome to another Valley National Bank Financial Moment. With us once again is Michael Zaremsky, head of U.S. Private Banking for Valley National Bank, member of the Investment Committee for Valley Financial Management. Michael, good to speak with you again. How are you?
Doing well, Zev. Great to speak with you as well.
Good to have you back. You know, one of the things that I keep hearing from our audience, people complaining, it's not just gasoline that it's breaking the $5 mark and can go higher and higher, but everything, including food, from one week to another, they're saying, what's going on? The inflation is just out of control. Even Janet Yellen, who didn't really pay much attention to it, is now saying it's a problem. So people are saying, when is it going to end? Where's it all going?
It's a great question, Zev, and frankly, it's the same question that we're getting on our end quite a bit from all of our clients. And as I address the question, I'd just like to remind everybody that the views expressed are my views, not necessarily those of the bank or the broker-dealer. We just had our investment committee today, and a lot of what we talked about were some of those same issues in terms of what are the factors that are driving the higher prices, what is the persistence of inflation, and kind of looking at the key question is, when does this end? How does this play out going forward? And it really occurred to me as I listened to some of the different views around the table, kind of the conundrum of what's called the Rubin vase. And I'm not sure how many of your listeners recall, but the Rubin vase is an optical illusion essentially. And depending upon your perception of it, some people see a white vase in the middle, and some people see two black outlined faces that point into the vase. And it's really just your perception of what's happening. And regardless of the opinion or the disposition of the members of our investment committee, we all kind of look at the same data, we all have the same information, and we can all reasonably explain what's going on. The real question, and I guess ties into the concept of the Rubin vase, is what do you see when you look at the information? And ultimately, what do you see at the back end and how this plays out? And as you know, over the last few months, we've all been talking about the need to slow down the economic growth, to slow down the price hikes, to slow down the inflation. Now that the Fed is starting to bite with policy to make those transitions and to start slowing things down, everyone's becoming very concerned about, oh my gosh, we're slowing down all the growth. We're taking away the fruit bowl. We're taking away, the adrenaline rush, whatever the analogy is. And again, as I say, it's kind of like looking into that Rubin vase. What do you see? You hear a lot of the analogies that people talk about trying to land a plane. And the concept is this a hard landing or a soft landing? And in some of our own internal discussions, again, I think the question is, some of it depends on what your view is as to the size of the runway. We're coming from a position where economic growth has been incredibly strong. Consumer balance sheets overall are quite healthy. The unemployment picture or employment picture is quite healthy as well. So the base point from which the Fed is working to try to slow down the economy and bring in prices and bring in inflation should give us a lot of room or a long runway to kind of land the plane. There have been other points in time where we've had high prices in inflationary environments with much lower growth rates, and you've heard the expression of trying to land a big plane on a postage stamp. And as I said, at this point in time, I think we have a much longer landing strip. Others might argue that while we do have a longer landing strip, we also have a much more persistent and higher inflation problem. And we can point to factors like the war in Ukraine. We can point to the ongoing supply chain issues, the COVID lockdowns in China as elements that kind of will keep the plane running faster so that the longer runway doesn't really necessarily help. And again, we should know more as we kind of continue to walk through some of the rate hikes that are happening this year. And the Fed will continue to provide us some updates in terms of what we see with the data. Is inflation starting to come down? Is it going to come down at a pace that's quick enough? Will production ramp up? Will supply chains get fixed quick enough to mend the damage? And I go back to the analogy of the Rubin vase. It depends if you're seeing the vase or the faces looking in and forming the vase. So what is your viewpoint on that? And I think that that's what we're all struggling with right now is what is the path forward?
So are you overly optimistic? I know generally speaking you are optimistic.
So Zev, I think it goes back to the same concept of I'm a lot more optimistic about the longer term than the shorter term because the shorter term is filled with a lot more uncertainty. So if we look at the longer term investment horizon, I feel pretty confident that the economy will continue to grow. over time. I feel confident that we'll get 2 to 3% growth rates over time. I feel confident that we'll get some element of 2 to 3% inflation, which we've historically gotten over time, and we'll continue to get 2 to 3% productivity gains. So I can reasonably assess that over a longer period of time, we'll continue to see the same type of growth and the same type of economic returns and equity returns that we've seen over time. When you shorten that window and say what happens in the next week, month, quarter, or even frankly throughout the end of the year, we're subject to a lot more volatility. And I'll go back to some of the key principles that we've discussed quite often. Depending upon your usage of assets is really the question of how much risk can you take and how much return are you seeking. So in the short term, I assume that we'll continue to see quite a bit of volatility. I'm going to assume that as we get some of the near-term news on inflation rates, as we get more clarity on what some of the Fed decisions are, we'll certainly see more volatility. It's been elevated for quite some time above that 20 level on the VIX, and I expect that will likely continue. However, at some point in time, when we do get a clearer pathway of what's going to happen, I think that we'll start to get a little bit more stability. So for the longer term investor, for people that are tucking money away for long-term savings, where they're not looking at having any near-term or immediate use, I still feel very confident in the longer-term picture. But like always, the shorter-term crystal ball is a lot cloudier.
Michael Zaremsky, head of U.S. Private Banking for Valley National Bank, member of the Investment Committee for Valley Financial Management. Thank you for being with us. I look forward to speaking with you again as we continue our discussions of financial news that we can use.
Thank you very much, Zev. Always a pleasure, and speak to you soon.
And we're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned.